right. Hi and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being with us for our program on how to prevent food waste at home, hosted by the Scotch Plains Public Library. I'm Jennifer Miller, a librarian in the Adult Services Department at the library. And I think we really could not have a better qualified presenter for this program. Our speaker is Dr. Sara Elnakib. She's an educator and professor in the Department of Family and Community Health Sciences of the Rutgers Cooperative Extension. She's also a registered dietitian nutritionist and has a master's in public health, in health education and behavioral sciences. Her research is focused on principles of nutrition literacy, environmental stewardship, education, and healthy eating. So we're really looking forward to the information that she has to share with us today. So welcome, Dr. Elnakib.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I know it's a beautiful day outside, so I really do appreciate, and I do hope that you get a chance to go out after this. So I'm just gonna switch my display. All right, excellent. So today we'll talk a little bit about preventing food waste at home. And like Jennifer said, my name is Sara Elnakib. I'm from the Department of Family and Community Health Sciences at Rutgers Cooperative Extension. And anytime I get an audience, I like to talk about Cooperative Extension just because it's your taxpayer dollars at work. So Cooperative Extension is the outreach arm of Rutgers University. There's a Rutgers office in all 21 counties, and there's three main departments. There's the Family Community Health Sciences Department, which is my department, 4-H Youth Development, which a lot of people know about, but don't know that it's part of Cooperative Extension, and Agriculture and Natural Resources, which provides a lot of education and programming around horticulture and environmental stewardship. And then we have the FNEP program, which is a program to support nutrition and food education in low-income communities. And we are funded, unlike most partnerships, it's a partnership between the federal, state, and local government. And so our funding comes from the USDA's National Institutes for Food and Agriculture, Rutgers University, as well as your county commissioners. So Union County contributes to the salaries of folks in our department. So for that, we'd like to thank you and hope that you find value in the work that we do. And so it allows us to kind of provide local action with like a national perspective, which is really great. So today we'll talk a little bit about why food waste matters, some background and stats on food waste, and the fact that New Jersey is doing a lot to reduce food waste, and we're very excited about it. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to reduce food waste at home and some great resources that I'll share with Jennifer that hopefully she'll be able to share with you. So to start, oftentimes people don't know that food waste is a huge issue in the United States, but we actually waste about 30 to 40% of the food we have here. And that's on average about 20 pounds per person per day, per month. And if you look at that for a perspective of the whole US, it's about 80 billion pounds for each year. And 80 billion pounds might be hard to picture, but that's about enough to fill the Empire State Building 1,000 times. And even though food waste, in itself is a problem, but there are also environmental, economic, and social impacts that food waste has that, are something to consider. So food waste globally, if we looked at food waste as a whole, as a country by itself, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China in the US. So obviously, when we talk about climate change and a lot of global health issues related to climate change, we often think of things like transportation or energy use, and we don't think about food waste, but food waste is a large issue that we can tackle to support climate mitigation. Another thing is that food waste costs money, right? So not only does the food that we grow cost money, but also now, hauling costs in addition to like landfill costs are all adding up to that bill that we pay every year for food waste. And so it's the economic impact of it is about 161 to 218 billion dollars a year in the United States alone. And this is in the same context that we have, 1 in 10 people, or 13.7 million people in the United States, who are food insecure, or don't know where their next meal is coming from. And so we know that the food we throw out is very nutritious. There was a 2012 study of the food waste supply chain, and it's found that it was high in things like fiber, vitamin D, calcium, and potassium, which are nutrients that are often lacking in the US diet. And so we know that the food that we're throwing out is actually very nutritious and could be feeding people who are food insecure. And so really trying to connect those dots is extremely important. And kind of just to drill down on this idea of climate change and food waste, according to Project Drawdown, which is a part of a nonprofit that looks at ways to mitigate climate change and stop the increase of temperatures in the world by about 2 degrees, found that the #1 solution that we can do to mitigate climate change and kind of stop it from getting a little bit warmer is to reduce food waste, right? And in addition to that, other things like health and education, especially for third world countries, and then plant-rich foods, plant-rich diets, so eating more plant-based foods, even if it's 1 day a week, all that can actually improve our, mitigate our climate change and actually reduce some of that increasing temperatures. So it's actually something that a lot of people don't think about, is their diet and their food waste, but that's one of the ways you can really make a difference with climate change. And then this has been a kind of interest in the United States and in New Jersey in the last few years. So in 2015, the EPA and USDA joined forces to create the first ever guidelines for the United States to reduce food waste by half by the year 2030. That's only 7 years away, which is really scary, right? And in New Jersey, we kind of followed suit, and in August 2017, we signed legislation to reduce food waste by half by 2030 from the municipal solid waste stream. And this is all kind of mimicking the UN Sustainable Development Goals of reducing the world's food waste by half by 2030. So we have a little bit ways to go, but it's definitely something that as we learn more, we can do more, right? And so this is really important. And I hope that once you learn from today, you go out and talk to your friends and family about it, because that's the #1 way we can kind of reduce food waste. So I'm going to talk a little bit about food waste, but I'd like to make a definition kind of distinction. So oftentimes when we talk about food waste, we're really talking about food loss and waste, because food is lost at every stage of the supply chain. So from the farm all the way to the consumer level. And usually food waste generally means food that is downstream from the supply chain, usually at the retail or consumer level. So when people actually touch the food, whereas food loss occurs usually before that, when you're at the farm or post-harvesting or distribution. So for the presentation, we're going to call food waste everything, right? Is all wasted food as food waste, but just so you know, technically speaking, anything that is lost before humans consume it or touch it is called food loss. And so how much is lost throughout the supply chain? So we'll follow the life of an apple just to think about just how much is lost. So an apple at the orchard, about 20 apples are lost at like the orchard in the farm. And then while the apple is going through post-harvest, trying to check for the right color, making sure that there are no worms, about 3 apples are lost out of every 100 apples. And then during packaging, about 1 apple is lost during packaging. And then there's transport and going to the grocery store, about 12 apples are lost there. And they're usually due to like colors or bruising or people not purchasing them. But then after that, once it gets to our hands and in our homes, we lose about 28 apples at the home of every 100 apples. So really, of the 100 apples that we've grown, we only, consume about 38 apples. And so that is wild, because most of the food waste that really occurs at this consumer level. And this example of the apple isn't new. It's actually something that we see across different food items. So this is a chart from the Food and Agriculture Organization report that looked at US, Australia, and Canada's food waste and loss, and it found that for perishable items, we lose a lot of items during production. So you think about spoilage or bruising, specifically for produce like fruits and vegetables and seafood. During processing and post-harvest and distribution, we've done a really good job of lowering the food waste. But where does most of the food waste happen? It happens at our level, once it gets home to us, right? At this consumer level. And we waste food indiscriminately, right? We waste fruits, vegetables, milk, protein, everything. And so if we wanted to do anything about food waste, this is where we can make the most difference, right? Where we are at home and reducing food waste at home. So the EPA created a hierarchy to help kind of us think about what are the ways you can reduce food waste and what is the most desirable way or preferred way to reduce food waste. So a lot of the times we think about, composting as the first thing we want to do with food waste, right? But the truth is, there are a lot of different things that you can do before you compost. And so the EPA recommends that we think about reducing food waste at the source. That means making smaller batches, freezing things that we won't, eat at the time, making sure that we basically make enough food to feed us and not more. And that can be easier done at home, but it can also still sometimes be difficult when things come up and you don't have plans for them, right? But then the next best thing is to really donate food, right? So feed hungry people, because this when we compost food, even though the nutrients go back to the soil, all the energy the calories that were in that food is now lost in that process, in the composting process. So we want to make sure that while we have so many people who are food insecure, that we want to feed hungry people if we can. And if we can't do that, we want to feed animals. And so I know, for example, Rutgers works with a pig farm in Pennsylvania to share any of the food scraps from the dining halls so that that they can kind of reduce food waste and make sure that we're feeding animals. And then there are some industrial uses for food waste. So for example, cooking oils, especially if you're going to like large chains like that have a lot of frying oil, you can use some of that to create biodiesels and biofuels, as well as some plastics. So some industries kind of use deviate some of their food waste to create industrial items. And then we want to compost if we can't do anything else. And then finally, the least desirable way is to put it in landfill. Unfortunately, in our current food system, we basically do an inverted version of this hierarchy, right? We throw everything out, and if we do anything about it, we compost. And so I'm hoping that this presentation will help you start thinking about how to reduce it at the source and maybe even feed hungry people so that we can kind of work more upstream in this issue. So what are some of the reasons why we waste food at home? So the National Resource Defense Council has done a really excellent report around food waste and trying to figure out what are the reasons why people waste at home. And some of the main drivers are things like people don't know food waste is a big issue, especially as it relates to climate change, right? So even just talking about food waste in the context of climate change allows people to think more about it. Also, there's a lot of confusion around date labels, which we'll talk about today. Oftentimes people think that date labels are a food safety, component, but they're really not. They're about, food kind of quality, not safety. And then there's obviously poor storage. My refrigerator sometimes looks like this, where it's jam-packed, right? And I can't see what's behind of anything. And so it creates a little bit of issue for planning, impulsive buying and purchasing and overproduction. And so there are some policy level solutions. So things like simplifying the date labels, which we know the FDA is looking at now to think about how to support date label modifications to make it easy for consumers to understand what is safety versus quality. Educating on better food management. And so that's kind of what we're going to do today in this presentation, and some infrastructure for composting at the local level. And I know that in New Jersey, we're working on both the infrastructure changes for composting and the date label issue. So there's legislation currently out there in Trenton looking at these two issues. So we're very excited and hoping that we'll be able to do something about this very soon. And on an individual level, we'll talk a little bit about some of the things we can do, but like understanding date labels, preserving food and decluttering your fridge are some easy ways. So what can you do to help? The first thing we'll talk about is planning your meals. And so creating a weekly menu plan or meal plan and creating a shopping list can be one of the easiest ways to reduce food waste, because at least that way you're kind of being more proactive and looking at how much you actually need to purchase versus what you think you need. It also can help you identify gaps in your diet, right? So oftentimes we eat kind of similar things because we're so busy and we kind of don't have the time to sit down and think about what we want to make. But when you meal plan, it actually provides you an opportunity to get creative, look at your full, overall meals throughout the week, and focus on what you need to improve and add to. And so we actually have a Healthy Meals on the Go program that is available for you to watch at any time, and it includes healthy meal planning. And so I'll be happy to share that kind of resource with you, but it's a great way to kind of not just reduce waste, but also identify any of your nutritional gaps. The next thing is to plan your shopping trip. So we oftentimes just rush through to the store. I know I do this all the time, right? When I kind of after work running to the store to try to get what I think I need, and I end up with duplicates and multiple jars of tomato sauce and things like that, right? And so the idea is to check first before you shop what you actually need, to make a list and actually buy only what's on that list, right? No impulse buying. And then of course, buying smaller amounts of food so that they don't expire quickly, So I'll give you a story. I have an 8-year-old daughter now, but she was, 6 not too long ago, and she loves strawberries. And so we used to buy a lot of fresh strawberries, and by, the middle of the week, half of the strawberries would go bad and we'd have to throw them out. And so we started buying half fresh strawberries, half frozen, to allow for like kind of longevity and still give her an opportunity to enjoy her strawberries. And so this idea of like trying to, think about like the more tender, less, hearty food, like options or produce to purchase kind of in the frozen produce sections, which are just as healthy and nutritious as the fresh versions. And then when you're kind of ready to store your items, you want to use the FIFO method, which is the first in, first out method. And this is used a lot in food service and restaurants, where they put the items that they just purchased in the back to move up the items that they purchased a while ago. And so the older items move first, and that way they're in the front of the cupboard or refrigerator and are more likely to be eaten first. Also, something I started in my fridge is like an eat me corner. So a section with all the leftovers that nobody wants to eat. So to encourage my family to make sure that they do eat it and we don't end up throwing it in the garbage, we have a whole section in the fridge that just is focused on like the leftovers that need to be consumed immediately. And then just decluttering your fridge every so often, so can actually help you make sure that you're not forgetting about those, strawberries or those tomatoes at the back of the fridge, and then they end up being a science experiment, right? With a lot of fungus on them. So just making sure that you're kind of checking and looking at every single thing on your fridge and your cupboards, every few weeks or every month. And then some foods can be frozen for longer storage. So oftentimes when I make something and I know like a large lasagna and I know my family's not going to complete it and they're going to finish eating all of it, I store half of it in the freezer, and that way it can live, stay in the freezer much longer, about 10 days to a month, whereas in the refrigerator it would only last a few more days. And so it allows me to kind of extend the shelf life of items without spoilage. And all I have to do is to put the date when I made it so that I can remember to take it out and use it when I need to. And even separating it into small portions can allow to defrost and eat portions at a time, so that we can make sure that we're not overusing. And then you also want to make sure that you're properly storing your items. So your refrigerator should be at 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and your freezer should be somewhere around 0 degrees or lower. If it's a little bit hotter than that, your food might actually ripen too fast and can go bad. Also, making sure that not all produce go in the refrigerator. So thinking about what the produce is and if it really needs to be refrigerated or not. Another thing that a lot of times we don't think about is kind of this ethylene gas and the foods that are ethylene producers versus those that are sensitive to ethylene. So we've all used ethylene to our advantage when we put, for example, a banana right next to an avocado, hoping that that avocado would ripen a little bit faster. But basically, like, bananas release a lot of ethylene, and so they might ripen certain foods faster. But this can be an issue when you put the wrong foods together, right? So oftentimes a lot of people put, for example, onions or kind of their peppers next to bananas or something else, and then they can kind of ripen too fast. And so just kind of keeping them separate when they need to be separate, or using ethylene to your advantage when you want something to ripen so that you can eat it faster. The next thing is that we want to make sure that we look at expiration date. So expiration dates are, I don't know if you've noticed, but they're different based on the state you're in. So I know that a lot of times people don't think that, they think this is like kind of a federal law or something like that, but it's really meant as a manufacturer's recommendation for when a food should be sold or consumed or kind of used. And so there are three main categories for for expiration dates that we see. We say sell-by dates, and those are dates that are meant for the manufacturers to understand when it would be best for these items to be sold in their store. And again, it's just for best quality. It's not an actual expiration date or for food safety. The next is the best by date, and that indicates to the consumer when the manufacturer kind of ensures that this product is the best quality. So again, not meant as a food safety date. And then finally, the use by date, and that is a date that is put by the manufacturers to really make sure that the consumers are eating the item at peak quality. So the best example for this is like cereal, for example, right? So cereal technically never expires. You can have cereal, 10 years old and it'll be fine. It'll just probably be a little stale, right? And so that's the idea, is most of this, most of these dates actually do not mean anything about safety. They really indicate quality. The only exception is infant formula. So infant formula is the only exception where the date actually matters, because for infant formula, it's the only place where the infant will receive all of its nutrients. And so because the nutrients degrade over time, they will have a use by date, and that families should not be using infant formula past that use by date, because that might threaten, result in life-threatening malnutrition if it's used a lot over time. So that's kind of really an important part. And people will ask me often, like, what about, things like eggs and milk, if they expire? I'm like, well, technically, sour milk is just yogurt. It's not going to actually hurt. So it's oftentimes it's just a perception of like what is bad or not unsafe, and it's not actually a food safety consideration or concern. And then finally, you want to make sure that you either use it and don't lose it. And so the USDA actually created this really cool food preservation app, which I will share with you. It's called the Food Keeper app that you can download on your phone. And it helps you think about, how long to keep leftovers, things like making sure that if you do have leftovers, you share them with your neighbors or family. I know oftentimes if I am going to my parents' house, I just bring lots of leftovers that I know that they would like. And then donate any unopened, perishable, non-perishable foods to the food bank. A lot of food pantries and food banks are more than happy to accept food, and they understand, the idea about date labels. So that's something that you can kind of rest assured and send them items. And then also learning about food preservation. So our department actually has a food preservation class that we're happy to kind of provide, and it teaches people how to can, pickle, freeze, and ferment food to preserve them. So especially during the season when we're going to get lots of, garden greens and maybe not know what to do with them or not be able to use them, right away. So making sure that you know how to preserve food. And then finally, feeding feeding, if you can't feed it to people or animals, then definitely making sure that you have a backyard composter or a composter that you can throw away any of your food scraps, so that you can turn that food into some beautiful nutrient-rich soil. So there's going to be a lot of great resources for you that I'm hoping to share with you, including the Healthy Meals on the Go video, as well as composting and handling leftovers and shopping safely. And then also we have a ways to prevent food waste paper that I'm happy to share with you. I'm also going to share with you some of the ethylene documents that I mentioned, and a great article by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics that talks a little bit about understanding date labels. So hopefully you'll find it helpful. So my recommendations for your next steps should be, first, watch our Healthy Meals on the Go presentation so that you're ready to start making your meal plans for the next week. Clean out your fridge. Remember to do first in, first out, and clean out those cupboards and have a little eat first section in your refrigerator. And then download that Food Keeper app so that you can, know when to keep things and how long to properly store them. And if you want some extra credit, we have our Wellness Wednesday program every single Wednesday at 12 noon. And so you can sign up to learn more about topics like this or other topics related to health, wellness, and kind of overall, healthfulness. So please feel free to sign up for that. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to open it up for questions.
Yeah, Sarah, just thank you. That was so informative and really, I think, inspirational and encouraging. These are pretty straightforward things that we all can do with a little bit of effort and changing some of our habits. And I will say, I love the Food Keeper app. I have it, and I especially recommend it to like my young adult children. Because when they were on their own, cooking for themselves, how do I know if this is still good?
Yeah.
Like, get the Food Keeper app.
Right. And it's USDA, so it's safe and it has all the latest information. So that's really good.
Yeah, exactly. Any questions?
I have a question. Will you be giving this talk about preserving food, or is it a video, or what is it?
Yeah, so the food preservation program is actually a paid program through Rutgers Cooperative Extension. So I'll share the link with Jennifer, and she could share it out to folks, but it's a series. So you take like a series of classes on food safety and food preservation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I have another question. Is there any, regulation about selling bulk foods? Like a lot of the food you get is packaged in certain quantities you may not want or whatever, and is there any regulation or incentive for stores to sell bulk so that you buy whatever you want? Like I know Whole Foods had a big section for bulk nuts and grains and rice and so forth, and then I guess, after the pandemic, everything kind of got reduced. So they really don't have much choice anymore. But I know there's one store in Princeton that has all kinds of, bulk beans and rice and so forth. But I mean, that's kind of far away, but it would be nice if there was some kind of encouragement. I don't know if there's any incentive or, socialization so that people know that, they could buy bulk. I mean, is the state doing anything, or I don't know?
So the state has really been focused on like large industries, because right now in New Jersey, it's really hard to like compost as like a company or like a large entity, because there isn't a lot of commercial composters in our area. So now there are 2 commercial composters, one in Trenton, and I can't remember where the second one is. I think it's in Ocean County somewhere. But basically, the state, what they did was they required anyone who's producing 52 tons of food waste a year, to divert that waste. So they're required by law now to divert that waste, the 52 tons, so they could reduce it, they can compost it, they can figure out what they want to do with it, but they have to not be able to produce that much. So that's kind of one of the first steps so that we can actually have, more composters or compost businesses in the state, now that people are required to, compost it. So that's kind of where I've seen a lot of legislation. For individual behavior, it's really hard. It's really hard to change people's behavior. So one thing that, the Department of Environmental Protection is really pushing is a lot of education. So I don't know if you know this, but New Jersey is the first state to require climate change in K-12 education. So that's kind of one of the ways we're trying to get people to learn about food waste, is through like, just learning about it in school and learning.
Oh, that's good. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very good.
yeah.
What happens is there any enforcement mechanism if these entities that produce 52 tons of waste per year? Is that what you said?
Yeah, 52 tons. Yeah. So I think there is, it's a regulation. So they would be fined, or there's some sort of like, something that would not be, that would happen if they don't adhere to that. Also, this is a new rule. So like the state is also just trying to figure out how to do it, right? Like we have to find out who is producing 52 tons or more, and then what their plans are to reduce it. It's not like something that's going to happen right away. It's just kind of like it's a way to build a business for composters here in the state. I think that's the intent behind it. And so trying to get more people to compost so that they need composters, so more composters come to the state.
But you said the legislation was passed it's on a bill, right? It's an actual law.
Yeah, no, it's a law now for the 52 tons, but there are bills right now about like the date labels in New Jersey, trying to change the date labels in New Jersey, as well as allowing for community composters. So right now, if you have a composter at your house, Vivian, and I come to your house and give you my compost, like that's illegal in New Jersey, because you would be considered now a commercial composter. So, and you'd have to get certain licenses and go through like certain, making sure that, there's certain regulations, things like that. So if you had, for example, a community garden and you have a composter there, people can't bring their scraps from home to that composter. You can compost whatever comes out of the garden, but you can't like bring your home scraps into that community composter. So that's like, those are the rules that we're trying to change, so that it makes it easy for people in New Jersey to compost, either in their own homes, it's allowed, but if like neighbors sharing composters, or in a community compost setting.
But right now you're saying if you have a community garden or something and there's a community composter, it's just for the garden scraps. It's not for people to bring in their compost.
Yeah.
Okay. And is the law, what is it called? The law? I mean, if we want
the bill for the composter?
Well, just that you said that in 2017 they passed this law.
Yeah, so that was the food waste, kind of, the law was really just to develop food waste goals for New Jersey. So I can send that information, and I can even send the ones that are bills right now.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. And the NJDEP has a really great website on a lot of their new food waste bills and laws, because it's kind of brand new. So I put it in the chat.
Okay.
But that's basically has a lot of information on food waste and how to reduce it.
I have a couple of questions or comments. First of all, thank you, Dr. Sara. I forgot to pronounce your last name, so I'm calling you Dr.
That's
Sara.
okay. That's okay. That's fine.
But first of all, like I always have these good ideals that I think, I want there to be less hunger in the world, and I want the environment to be good. However, the problem with me is that in my own apartment, I have been pretty bad with wasting a lot of food. So I have these, I say I care, and I do care, but then I'm not actually doing my own part of it, because locally in my own apartment, I'm wasting a lot of vegetables, especially vegetables and some fruit. So that's just the comment that I'm looking to, put my actions where my convictions are, and to be more responsible. But I've been kind of like a repeat offender, so to speak, because for years and years I've kept wasting so much food, not purposely, but just I. So anyway, that's the first comment that I have.
And I would say you're not the only one. I think we're all like in that same boat. And like, I think one of the things is just realizing that we can do something about it, right? Like, just like you said, trying to align our actions with our convictions. And at the same time, like, just knowing its impact, I think changes the way you look at food waste. You think, oh, it's just like one piece of lasagna, or just like one, apple or whatever. But when you think about like the context and how much we waste throughout the year, I think it makes it like more of has more of an impact. At least for me, it does, I think.
Yeah. I'm just absorbing what you were saying. Yeah, it does add up. Yeah. So I have two questions. The first question is it's sort of like comment / question, which is I know the technique of working together with other people, or having like buddies, or people you talk with to work on goals together. I'm using that, attempting to use that with a cleaning partner, where I report how I'm doing with my cleaning in my apartment, because that's something I need to work on. But so I'm wondering if this can be employed in this case, like where I'm sure it can in some way, like in other words, where people become accountable to one another and check in with one another, whether it's just someone checking in with their friend and saying, I'm doing better with food waste, I'm wasting less food, or someone even like on a larger level, where like a business will check, or a restaurant, or will check in, or will report to someone that they know. I'm just wondering any thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think social accountability is like one of the best ways to change behavior, right? Once you tell people that you're accountable to them, and especially certain people have different motivations, but a lot of people are motivated by what others think. So I think that's definitely a great strategy. If you can find somebody and just kind of tell them, like, I'm planning on working on food waste reduction, and I'm going to report to you, and I think that's a great idea.
Great idea.
Thank you. And finally, I just have one last question, which is a comment / question, which is I sometimes go to like dinners, for example, at my temple, where they have a dinner, and I notice, or they have like refreshments after a service. And I noticed that, at least at my temple, I can't say this is the case everywhere, they always have so much leftover food because they don't want to run out. So because they don't want to run out, and I don't think this is a Jewish thing either. I'm sure this is like going on in churches and everywhere. But the idea that it would, and that I think, like, personally, I feel like, say like one of the dishes did run out at a dinner, you would have the other dishes to eat. It's not like, it wouldn't be at the end of the world if one of the types of items ran out, and then you could eat the other food, or whatever. But so I personally think it would be better if there was, at these social, receptions and gatherings, if there was less food there, and then like, so this way, as opposed to having so much that it's just like there's some, I don't know what they do with it at the end, that they just have so much food because they're just afraid of the possibility that they might possibly run out. That's just the way I look at it. Wondering about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very real thing. And I think so the National Resource Defense Council developed a whole kind of campaign around Save the Food. And they created what they call a guesstimator. So it estimates how much food you need per guest for certain, events. And they really did it for Thanksgiving, but like it could be used for whatever, including, temple, like, or like any, or church, or any kind of gathering of people. And so I'm putting the website on the chat right now, but that's like a great resource for people to decide, how much food do they really need? And I think more importantly, it's okay if people make too much food because it's like they don't want to run out. As long as somebody takes it home and eats it, like that's the most important thing. Like we just had an event at Hudson County Community College where we were doing something around food security, and we had a ton of food left over, and we're like, everyone has to take something home. Like, no, we are not throwing out any food, So that could be like kind of the first step, is just normalizing people taking food back, and making sure that there's no leftover food that is thrown out. I think that's the more important piece, because you can try to estimate how much you need, but at least making sure that people don't throw out food after an event is a great way to make sure that part is taken care of.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I just had one question about the slide you showed. I think you said it was the Food and Agriculture Organization. Did you say that they estimated that the amount of greenhouse gas that wasted food emits would be, if it were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so it's the third, if all globally food waste was a country, so if you take all of the food waste from all over the world and make it its own emitter of greenhouse gases, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China and the US. So that means more than, transportation in those countries, like all of the things that emit greenhouse gases. And that's just food waste alone. It doesn't take into consideration things like transporting food waste, right? Or all of the energy and resources that go into developing that food to throw it out. And we're just talking straight food waste from like methane production. Because what happens is food waste, when it goes to a landfill, it doesn't break down like the way it's supposed to, because it's in a landfill. So there's layers of food and plastics and other kind of things. So it creates an anaerobic gas called methane. And that gas is 29 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is, what we think about when we think about, greenhouse gases and creating kind of like a layer in the ozone layer, right? But methane is actually 29, some say 25 to 29. That's like the studies say 25 to 29 times more potent. It's stronger. And so that's kind of where that issue is. So we're talking about methane production alone, not even just all of the other things that go into food waste.
Yeah, that's hard to believe that it would be the third.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share the resource if you want around greenhouse gas emissions for food waste, but it's part of the Food and Agriculture Organization report, as well as other reports by the National Resource Defense Council, but they've extrapolated from that Food and Agriculture report.
Okay, very
The
interesting.
UN's, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Okay, so
I'm sorry, I do have a
go
question.
ahead.
I just wanted to see if anyone else, if Jen or Judy had a question, but I guess not. Because I didn't want to, because I've already asked a few, but I've had an interest in, I don't know much about it, Dr. Sara, but I've had an interest in addressing world hunger, especially in some of the less wealthy countries in the world. I'm not that I'm an expert in this at all, but I just had an interest in it. And I'm just wondering if you have anything you could say about how, I think like if we as a country in the United States could reduce the food waste in our country, it might actually not only help the people that are hungry in this country, but maybe some of that we would need less food in this country, and some of that food could actually stay in some countries that might be poor, and that people might need that nutritious food more. So I'm just wondering, in any connection you can draw between reducing our food waste and reducing world hunger.
Yeah, I definitely think, at least for local and like US, based food insecurity, there's definitely a way to connect those dots, right? So there's a lot of food that we throw out that is perfectly edible, that is, someone else can have. So in fact, there's like a new app that was developed a few years ago called Too Good to Go. And that app helps you find, food that is in the local area, that is marked down, so that you can so you could purchase it, and at the same time for restaurants to kind of get rid of their food waste in a socially responsible way. And so that's, those are ideas and things that we've tried to do. My group works a lot with schools, and so we created share tables in schools, where school, cafeterias, kids in school just drop off food items that they're not going to eat, that another student can eat, or they can serve it in an after school program, or they can give it to the local food pantry. So there's definitely a lot of connections to kind of reducing food waste at that level, and connecting it to food security, because a lot of times we see it in the same communities, right? Like we're even in New Jersey, we have hunger, right? We have food insecurity. And so just kind of connecting those dots internally can really improve, food security, and also support, reduction of food waste. Yeah.
Thank you again.
No problem. And Vivian, I just shared something in the chat, but I wanted to just share my screen really quickly. And this is the fact sheet from the Food and Agriculture Organization from the United Nations that talks about the carbon footprint of global food waste. And it kind of looked at all of the countries' greenhouse gas emissions in 2011. And food waste was kind of the third largest here. So I shared this with you in the chat, but this is kind of where the reference that it came from.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, the program we had a couple of weeks ago on composting, the gentleman from the New Jersey Composting Council also, that was a big point that they really emphasize, and they have a lot of information about that on their website as well.
That is the New Jersey Composting Council?
New Jersey Composting Council, yeah, I can send that
Okay.
link to you and everybody.
Will you be sending out the links that were in the chat?
Sure, I'll send them out to.
If you send them to me, yeah, then I'll make sure they get shared.
Okay.
With
No, thank you.
everybody.
Yeah, because I don't know how to save the chat.
I'm not sure I do either, to be honest.
Yeah, and I'll share just really quickly. This is our food waste website. So we have a team at Rutgers working on food waste reduction, and we do it at different locations. But this is kind of some of our fact sheets on reducing food waste at home and what food waste is. And then we actually have, how to reduce it at home, and some information, some resources that I'll share. Actually, this presentation is right here. And then we have the same thing for schools. And what we do, we actually do a lot of work in schools, like we do food waste audits and things like that. We talk a little bit about the environmental impact of food waste and some of the references that I made. And then we also found out that from schools that a lot of times health inspectors are folks that they're worried about, to make sure that they're allowed to donate food or whatever. So we worked with the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic to create these policy fact sheets or legal fact sheets on what is allowed to be donated in New Jersey, what is allowed to, what are date label rules in New Jersey, things like that. And so those are the fact sheets, and we have some training programs for health inspectors on reducing food waste as well. So all of that can be found on our website, and I'll share all of this, the website itself, which has a lot of resources with Jennifer.
Oh, great.
Great. I'm going to end the recording here, I think.